Look how much we've been collecting in revenues. And I did this in part because Wilfred's here and he can talk about the UK trade deal. But just this is the monthly numbers. And they have gone up a lot. June is actually set for another big increase of $27 billion. That is money coming into U.S. coffers from tariffs. We are collecting a lot of revenue. So far, guys, $121 billion has flowed into the U.S. government since the start of the fiscal year. It's still a tiny portion of the overall revenues that the U.S. government gets, but it's increasingly a lot, especially we haven't seen it in terms of the consumer paying off higher inflation.
When it comes to the economy, Donald Trump deserves the benefit of the doubt because time after time, all of the experts are proven wrong with all of their predictions about the country. So Donald Trump, of course, is out there making financial decisions to help out America. And then all the talking heads, all of the big brains out there say, oh, the sky is falling. And then, of course, it never comes to pass. And that's exactly what we're going to see today with Kevin Hassett, who's the director of the National Economic Council, telling Sarah Eisen exactly what's really going on. So before we get to these clips, don't forget to like and comment on this video so we can break through the algorithms. Here we go.
CBO says that the Senate bill increases the deficit by $3.3 trillion from 2025 to 2034, and that is $1 trillion more than the House bill. There were already concerns about the deficit in this bill. Do you disagree with those numbers?
Oh, I 100% disagree with those numbers. You remember that in the House bill, there were a bunch of things that were temporary, that were there for the first 4 or 5 years, but then looked like they raised money in the out years. But of course, a big tax hike in the 5th year is going to cause a recession and reduce growth and increase the deficit. The number that I think is the best number to think about when you're looking at that $3.3 trillion is that if we get 3% growth instead of 1.8% growth out of this bill, then that adds $4 trillion to revenue, which means that this thing is a big deficit reducer. This is the biggest spending cut in history, the biggest tax cut in history, and with a little bit of growth, it's going to be incredibly positive for the budget. And finally, don't forget, this isn't the only bite of the apple, that we've got lots of discretionary spending that we're planning to send up to the Senate to rescind. Russ Vought, the OMB director, suggests that maybe that's going to amount to about $160 billion this year. If you get the $160 billion of rescissions, then multiply that by 10 to think about what the deficit impact is. And so this is a very fiscally responsible bill.
So it does rely, though, on the economy moving up to 3% growth. Why are you confident that this bill does that when, I mean, it is mostly an extension of the taxes?
Well, there are a heck of a lot of, first of all, you have to compare it to what's the baseline, right? So if we have the biggest tax hike in history and we go back to not expensing capital machinery and so on, then what is that growth effect? That's a really big negative. And then there's all this new stuff that's very, very growth positive. So, for example, no tax on overtime. We've got about 90 million American workers that are hourly workers. When they don't have to pay tax on their overtime, then they're likely to work harder. That increases supply, puts more money in their pockets. The Council of Economic Advisors has modeled all these things and says that income for the typical American family is going to go up by $10,000. And that's real income. So this is a very, very growth positive, income positive bill.
CBO's estimates for the Trump 2017 tax cuts, look at the estimates and look at the actual numbers. They're pretty much in line. In fact, the CBO was pretty much on target, except for perhaps the effect of a once-in-a-generation pandemic. So the idea that the CBO is suddenly unreliable is not true. But even if they were, what are the president's numbers? What does he think it's going to be?
Well, and let's talk about the Tax Cut Act. I didn't get to finish this point last night, which is it was unpopular before it was passed. But once Americans saw the positive effects, they want it to be extended, and that's what the big. But
what does the president think is going to happen to Medicaid recipients as a result of this bill?
So I think something that has been lost in this entire conversation is if we have any chance of getting our fiscal house in order, of reducing deficits and debt for the long term, we will have to make difficult decisions when it comes to the mandatory spending programs, including Medicaid. That's a reality. And if we keep
let me let Sheila in. She's chuckling over there.
Well, it's hard to know where to begin, but I mean, everyone agrees that this bill is not going to reduce our fiscal problems. It's massively adding to the deficit.
That's not true that everyone agrees.
By $3 trillion.
It cuts more than $1 trillion.
Well, based on fake math that you guys are peddling.
You believe that our money earned is the property of the government.
No, it's because because that is the cost of the bill. I mean, you can say that
Tax cuts don't cost anything. I reject that.
You can say, first of all, the debt and the deficit are the two existential problems that are facing this nation. And if you don't address them, our children are going to pay, and you're going to set the country on a cliff to oblivion. I mean, that was the argument of Republicans. Where has that gone?
Well, I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. I think you can cut taxes or make the tax cuts permanent and add other tax cuts for working class Americans. I think you can do necessary welfare reform. I think you can invest in the southern border and border security, which this bill is doing. And then you can also pay attention to spending. Now, Pete's right. I mean, if some of this bill doesn't get to the mandatory spending, and ultimately of the federal budget right now, like 21% of it is discretionary and the rest is just mandatory spending. So you got to tackle that down the road. This isn't a spending bill. It's a reconciliation bill, and it's largely a tax bill that makes the tax cuts permanent, adds tax cuts for working class Americans. On the Medicaid piece, though, there's obviously going to be a big debate about this. I mean, there are like almost 5 million able-bodied people on Medicaid who simply choose not to work. They spend 6 hours a day socializing and watching television. And if you can't get off grandma's couch and work, I don't want to pay for your welfare.
I don't know where you're getting those numbers from.
CBO.
CBO says there are 5 million Americans who are sitting on their couch watching television.
Regardless, this kicked 17
that you just cited.
And there you have it. Nothing but doom and gloom from the Democrats on these different segments. But one thing I want to point out is all of these numbers, the $3 to $5 trillion in additional debt, are based off of the CBO's projection of 1.8% economic growth. Even though Abby Phillips just showed on the screen that Donald Trump got 3% and 2.5% growth when he was president the first time. Okay, and if we hit those numbers, according to Kevin Hassett, then actually we have a surplus of money. We can start paying off debt. And this is where it comes into play with Donald Trump giving him the benefit of the doubt. He has been correct many times in the past, and all of these experts, all of these talking heads have been proven wrong time and time again. And by the way, the CBO is not infallible because, as Abby Phillips just showed on the screen there, notice how they had a projection of $1.5 trillion less in revenue collected under Donald Trump. Right? So they were wrong about how much money was being brought in. And I'd be willing to wager that Donald Trump is going to have way more than just 1.8% growth in the economy. All right. And by the way, do I love everything in this big, beautiful bill? No, I don't. It's way too much spending. And I wish it was more fiscally responsible. But the one thing we're not taking into account is the growth that could happen under Donald Trump, in which case all of the arguments fall away, except for, of course, the Medicaid argument, the one the Democrats keep beating into the ground, which is completely false. Who's being kicked off the rolls? Well, hopefully the illegal immigrants, even though the Senate actually stripped that one out. But at the very least, the millions of able-bodied Americans who are just getting a free ride. But of course, Abby Phillips is going to tout the CBO when she agrees with it and then ignore it when she doesn't. Because Scott Jennings is over there saying, yeah, according to the CBO, these are the numbers, but Abby Phillips is like, yeah, don't look at the screen anymore, okay? But these are all the failed arguments the left has been making. They want to take things that have not happened yet and pretend it's set in stone for the future, even there's a whole bunch more variables that honestly lean towards Donald Trump's success. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and say hi to your mom for me. Do you like t-shirts? Of course you do. And now you can support the channel by buying an Angry Teacher t-shirt designed by me, Angry Teacher. So if you like America, if you like freedom, if you like liberty, then go ahead and click the link in the description where all designs, of course, are 100% mother approved. So enjoy yourself and find something you like today.